Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today is the 50th anniversary of the incorporation of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. This whole year has been designated for that celebration or remembrance. Has ISKCON been a success in these 50 years? Well, how will we measure that success, whether it's been successful or not? That we have to judge by whether or not Srila Prabhupada is pleased. That means if his instructions are being followed and his desires fulfilled. So in many ways, ISKCON has been successful. Definitely from 1966 to 1977 was greatly successful with Srila Prabhupada personally leading. And in the remaining 39 years, have also been many great successes. One of the great successes of ISKCON, since Srila Prabhupada left, has been the wide spreading of Krishna consciousness in the former Soviet Union and other states, other nations which were formerly part of the Warsaw Bloc. So one measure of the ongoing success of ISKCON is the fact that we are here today in Russia practicing Krishna consciousness, which in 1977 was unimaginable to be able to practice openly like this. Maybe it'll become like that again, we don't know. There is this new legal amendment which threatens to curtail religious liberty within Russia. Nevertheless, it still remains as a fact that one of the great successes of ISKCON since Srila Prabhupada's departure has been the very wide spreading of Krishna consciousness in what was formerly called the Eastern Bloc. From the West it was called the Eastern Bloc. I don't know what it was called here. Maybe here it was called the civilized world. I don't know. Another great success of ISKCON has been the widespread acceptance and spreading of ISKCON in India. Srila Prabhupada foresaw this. Even before he went to the West, he thought that the Indian people are not taking to Krishna consciousness very, very seriously. If I go to the West and bring some devotees from there, then they'll follow that example and take it up. Srila Prabhupada had that vision, and most of his disciples didn't. They couldn't understand why Srila Prabhupada was investing so much time, energy, and money in India, because ISKCON wasn't immediately very well accepted, very, very widely well accepted within India. But now it is, and that is a great success of ISKCON. If we're to measure ISKCON's success by the fulfillment of Srila Prabhupada's desires, which we have to measure it by that, then we can say that the translation of Srila Prabhupada's books and distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books in many languages is certainly pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, and this has continued since Srila Prabhupada's departure from this world. For which much credit must go to Harikesh, especially in this area, to Harikesh Das, who was previously instrumental in the very highly influential throughout the whole world of ISKCON, and especially in this Eastern Bloc, that he is now left ISKCON and is in a different consciousness is regrettable, but still we must give credit where credit is due. So there are many points of success. The movement has spread to many countries where it was not present previously. It hasn't been all roses, to use the English saying. We could supply a Russian one. When talking about the success in the movement spreading widely in Russia and India, we could also note that it went through a serious downturn in much of the Western world, including America. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about the downside because I already do enough of that. Or maybe I don't do enough. Maybe I should speak more of these things to try to call the attention of devotees to points that require rectification. But it seems that most devotees they're not ready to hear these things. So I'll speak a little about what is Srila Prabhupada's mission. And that is the subject of a book that I'm working on now. Now means that's a general now. Obviously, I'm not working on it right this very minute. When I can make some time, I'll get back to working on that. It's a very important book to define what is Srila Prabhupada's mission. As we say, the success of ISKCON can be understood to the extent that Srila Prabhupada's instructions are being followed and his desires fulfilled. The success of our lives as followers of Srila Prabhupada depends on how much we follow to the extent that we follow his instructions and fulfill his desires. So that is true individually and collectively, societally. So to be able to be successful in Krishna consciousness, at least within ISKCON, we have to know what are Srila Prabhupada's instructions and his desires. That we can get primarily from reading his books. Many of his instructions regarding ISKCON are not directly in his books. For instance, the 7 purposes of ISKCON, which Srila Prabhupada incorporated into the charter document, that is not within his books. And many of his desires and instructions are recorded in his letters, especially regarding the institutional organization of ISKCON. We get much direction from his letters and also from his lectures, conversations, and also from instructions that he gave personally, verbally, that haven't been solidly or tacitly recorded. They remain in the oral record. These are the least reliable, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily should be rejected. For instance, I'm not aware of any written statement or audio recorded statement of Srila Prabhupada's that Mayapur city should be population no more than 50,000.
Or more? Or more?
Not more. Or that Srila Prabhupada had said that if you develop this Mayapur city, Bhakti Thakur will personally take you back to Godhead. But these are widely accepted as having that Srila Prabhupada actually stated this, although there's no solid record of it. Now we may ask, well, if Srila Prabhupada's instructions regarding ISKCON are there in his books and letters, then why make a separate book about it? Well, one reason is to bring it all together in one place. And some instructions may even seem to be contradictory. For instance, as I have heard, Srila Prabhupada, this would be, I'm not sure, it must be 1976 or 1976 in Vrindavan, he told one sannyasi that you don't stay here in Vrindavan, you go and travel. You should, as a sannyasi, you should always be traveling. And he told another sannyasi disciple, you don't go anywhere, you stay here in Vrindavan and manage this project. So some of Srila Prabhupada's instructions have to be understood in context, according to time, place and circumstance. Practically the only instruction that is not subject to the time, place and circumstance rider is Smartavya Satatam Vishnu Vismartavya Najati Chit. One should always think of Vishnu and never forget him. Can you think of any other rule which cannot be modified in some circumstances? Any suggestions?
Chant Hare Krishna and be happy.
Well, chant Hare Krishna, okay, but that may be modified in some circumstances also. For instance, if you all started chanting Kirtan now, then there wouldn't be a class. You may say, well, hearing is equivalent to chanting, but that in itself is a qualifier. So another reason to make this book is to present my understanding, not of what Srila Prabhupada actually wanted ISKCON to be. And when I say my understanding, you say, well, so what? What does it matter about your understanding? But actually, every guru is understood by his various disciples, who may understand his instructions in slightly or even greatly different ways. But in this book, I want to present Srila Prabhupada's instructions, trying to understand exactly what Srila Prabhupada wanted, not what I want him to want. In other words, to faithfully represent him, or to use his term, to be a transparent medium, to not get in the way of Srila Prabhupada's instructions. The duty of a guru in ISKCON is to act as an unobstructed conduit of Srila Prabhupada's instructions, so that his disciples can get the same benefit from Srila Prabhupada's instructions as did Srila Prabhupada, as did the disciples of Srila Prabhupada who directly took instruction from Srila Prabhupada. This is the same principle by which Srila Prabhupada composed Bhagavad Gita as it is, that students of Bhagavad Gita today should be able to get the same benefit from it as Arjuna did directly hearing it from Krishna. Otherwise, it's not really Bhagavad Gita at all. The importance of Bhagavad Gita is that it is eternal spiritual knowledge given by the greatest authority, Krishna himself. And as Srila Prabhupada writes in the very beginning of his presentation of Bhagavad Gita, in the preface, the present Krishna, I'm paraphrasing, the present Krishna consciousness movement is fully authorized because it is based on Bhagavad Gita as it is. So what are Srila Prabhupada's instructions and desires? Well, in summary, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Very simple. But because we as human beings are not simple, we require so many other instructions. Because there are laws which govern various countries, we require a formal institution, for instance, to collect money from the public. In most countries, it's required that that people have a legal status to do so, which can fall into two broad categories: the legal status, commercial and charitable. I suppose the political, that could broadly fall in the category of charitable. Anyway, that's just a side point. So to be recognized as a charitable institution so that people just don't collect money in the name of doing good to others and cheatingly use it for their own benefit. It is required to have a charitable or religious institution recognized by the government. If we are to preach Krishna consciousness, if we are to have temples, then we require a legally registered institution. Otherwise, if we had the temples registered in people's personal names, well, that would be very dangerous, because they could take it and they could appropriate that property for themselves. It would not be legal to solicit donations for private property, and nor would people be willing to donate unless they see it's a recognized charity. So, for organized preaching and even organized practicing of Krishna consciousness, an institution is required, which means that there have to be legally registered officers of the institution who have legal responsibilities. Properly, for instance, properly audited accounts have to be presented regularly to the government. All these organizational matters, they might not seem to be very relishable, but much good management is required so that we can, in this world, as much as possible, free from impediments, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Yesterday someone asked about Indra Prabhu, whose life could be summarized as the personification of chant Hare Krishna and be happy. So it's nice that devotees like to glorify him. But we shouldn't think that those who engaged in management and organizing the movement so that he could be free to chant Hare Krishna and be happy were or are any less than he. A point which, frankly, he seems to have misunderstood in his scathing written attack on anyone who doesn't like him, or anyone who's engaged in management. He seems to think they're all materially motivated. So, Srila Prabhupada, we often hear about his kindness and his compassion and so on, but which certainly were very central to his personality. But another major factor in Srila Prabhupada's success in spreading Krishna consciousness around the world was his worldly know-how. The very fact that he registered the International Society for Krishna Consciousness at a time when the whole movement consisted of a rented storefront in a dingy area of New York City. And at the time he had no committed followers. The very fact that he did this shows that he was very much aware of and very much concerned of the need for legal incorporation or dealing with worldly matters in the service of Krishna. So definitely the life, the essence of ISKCON is the chanting of Hare Krishna, the discussion, the reading and the distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books, festivals, temples, prasad distribution. And we should add to this Varnashram communities. Unfortunately, if we are to discuss the failings of ISKCON since Srila Prabhupada left, the neglect of this side should be mentioned. So this is the essence of ISKCON. The essence is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada, Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. That's the essence. Sadhu Sangha, living in the association of devotees. But we're celebrating today the institutional establishment of ISKCON. It wasn't that anything greatly changed in the storefront by Srila Prabhupada having that society incorporated. But in hindsight, we can look back at his foresight.
What is hindsight?
Looking back.
Oh.
So, what is the mission of Srila Prabhupada? It's solidly based on Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. It is meant to fulfill Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction, Priti Vite Ache, Jato Nagara Digram Sarvatra Pachati Vimananda. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's name will be preached in every town and village of the world. It is meant to re-spiritualize the world. In other words, it stands in opposition to the demoniac civilization that dominates the whole world. It is meant to establish actual culture, which means Vedic culture, Varnashram society. It's a huge mandate. When Srila Prabhupada was present, it felt like we were just going to take over the whole world. With incredible confidence, with incredible enthusiasm, determination and confidence, Srila Prabhupada pushed on Krishna consciousness. He challenged the whole demoniac society. He challenged Darwin's theory, which practically on logical grounds, which at that time no one thought to do. He expressed serious doubts about the so-called sending of men to the moon, which at that time no one did. He did so because these ideas, biological evolutionary theory, and the ability of men to go to the moon in technologically manufactured machines, the possibility of both these ideas are opposed to Shastra. And Srila Prabhupada was very, as a genuine Acharya, he was absolutely rooted in Shastra. And therefore he produced books, his most important, or the books that he himself gave most importance to, were translations and commentaries on Shastra. If we find most of these so-called spiritual leaders, New Age, this, that, they write books, it's just their own ideas. But Srila Prabhupada, he presented Shastra verse by verse with the Sanskrit script, with the word-by-word translation, and commentaries in which he profusely quoted from Shastra and the previous acharyas. Srila Prabhupada in this way demonstrated the ideal of Vaishnavism as being das anudas 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 anudas. How can we be das anudas anudas and on and on and on? Well, if we're the servant of our Guru, and he is the servant of his Guru, and that Guru is the servant of his Guru, and this way we become das anudas anudas, Vaishnav, das anudas, or Gopi Bhartu, Pada Kamalaya, dasu das anudasa. Because, we become the servant of the servant of the servant, up, all the way to Krishna. The Srila Prabhupada is very concerned to present, this is authorized, this is reality, this is truth. It's not my personal idea. As he often said, this is the same truth that Krishna spoke, that Brahma spoke, that Narad spoke, that Vyasa spoke, that all the great personalities spoke and will speak. And Srila Prabhupada made this the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He very clearly put Krishna in the center. Not only in the center, in the sides also. Everywhere. He didn't put himself in the center. Naturally, his disciples wanted to glorify him. And as a humble servant of the previous acharyas, he accepted that glorification and offered it back to them. But Srila Prabhupada, he put the emphasis on Krishna, not on himself. Therefore, he was supplied with so much energy by Krishna. Kali Kale Juga Dharma Narma Sankirtan Krishna Shakti Binat Nahe Ta Pravatan. In this age of Kali, the religious process for the age is congregational chanting of the holy names. One who is not imbued with the potency of Krishna cannot establish this in the world. Because Srila Prabhupada completely transparently, without any personal motive, represented Krishna, so Krishna's divine energy worked through Srila Prabhupada. And as a result, Srila Prabhupada was able to do unprecedented activities in the service of Krishna. But of course, ISKCON isn't only Prabhupada. Well, in one sense it is, but a society means more than one person. Srila Prabhupada had so many disciples who sacrificed in so many ways for spreading his mission. And although nowadays those disciples of his who are prominent as gurus, they get most of the attention. But there are many, many devotees who contributed their youthful years for the spreading of this Krishna consciousness movement. Many of them fell away, but we should not forget their contributions. Certainly Srila Prabhupada doesn't forget their contributions. Krishna doesn't forget their contributions. And, of course, ISKCON is not even Prabhupada and his direct disciples. You are all part of ISKCON. You all form ISKCON. So many great histories could be written about the glorious activities devotees have performed in spreading this movement. Many tragic stories could be told also of how devotees, they made serious mistakes, some fell down. Thinking of the 50 years of ISKCON, it's nice to look back and generally depending on our perspective, anyway, let's take a little bit of time. It's nice to look back at 50 years. Depending on our perspective, some will tend to see all the good things more, and others will tend to highlight the things which shouldn't have happened, which did happen. Maybe the most regrettable thing during this 50 years celebration is that it's only being celebrated by ISKCON. Governments aren't coming forward to congratulate the members of ISKCON. Leaders of governments are not asking if they can come to the ISKCON programs to join in the celebrations. In other words, overtly our movement is very minor and insignificant in the world. Some status is there in India and elsewhere hardly. So, looking back at the last 50 years, whichever way we look at it, more important is to look forward. In 1977, I doubt very much if anyone could have imagined the condition of ISKCON at the present time, today. Most devotees, as far as I can recall, expected that ISKCON would just take over the world, which from today's perspective seems fantastic and naive. It would be very difficult to predict what is upcoming because that's the very nature of time. Time alters everything in this world. Especially in Kali Yuga, things tend to change very quickly, and generally for the worse, not for the better. Tataschanu dinam dharma satyam shocham shamadaya kalena balena rajam nangshantyayur balam smritihi. With the passing of every single day in Kali Yuga, all good things decrease. Examples are given. Dharma or religion, truthfulness, cleanliness, tolerance, compassion, lifespan, bodily strength, and mental strength. The things change generally for the bad, but the Krishna conscious movement is meant to give a solution to this dangerous situation of Kali Yuga. But the kind of Krishna consciousness that will change the situation of human society is not some whimsical, half-baked Krishna consciousness. if Srila Prabhupada had not been absolutely determined and fixed, then the Krishna conscious movement would not have taken shape in the Western world. But similarly, unless we're fully determined and focused and have full faith, then we won't be able to change the world with Krishna consciousness. We should not be content to take Krishna consciousness as a kind of religion. What I mean to say is that on Sundays, most Christians, that's their Sabbath day, they go to church. And as I remember from my Roman Catholic childhood, it was considered essential for every Catholic to go to church on Sunday. They would dress in what was called their Sunday best, the best clothes that they kept for going to church on Sunday. No shorts or jeans. It was unimaginable that anyone could go to church in such casual dress. So on one side, they took it very seriously. The Catholics, at least at that time, it was a major part of the definition of each Catholic's identity that they were a Roman Catholic. Self-identity. But after the church service, the Mass, they would come out and then they would form little circles and groups and chat and joke and laugh and smoke. The men would smoke, not the women. And typically opposite every church, strategically located for good business, is a pub. Typically, strategically located just opposite each church is a pub. Because after the church service, the men go to the pub. Many of them go to the pub. And the women go home and cook roast beef, which is a special for Sunday. Special item for Sunday. So, people, undoubtedly they were religious and they believed in God, but they weren't facsimiles of, for instance, St. Francis of Assisi. Maybe you've heard of. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
Yeah. In the Western world, he's considered to be an epitome, an ideal of spiritualism. So the point I'm making here is that most people, although in the church, in the Mass, they're praying and they really believe in God, and many, I presume that they get something spiritual from that, but afterwards they socialize, and it's partly religious, spiritual, and a lot of socializing also. So their religion is part of their life. It is not their life. But real Krishna consciousness means that Krishna consciousness is our life. And it's devotees with that spirit who can establish Krishna consciousness in the world. Prana che ja, she hetu pracha. Those who've got life, they can preach. So they must preach. They do preach. Now others may preach, but more social kind of Krishna consciousness. Now there is scope for this wishy-washy Krishna consciousness within the Krishna consciousness movement. That is called the Varnashram Society. Or rather, not within the Krishna consciousness movement, but under the supervision of the Krishna consciousness movement. Persons who like to be Krishna conscious, but not too much according to their own estimation, they can do some work in Varnashram society. But the core of the society should be fully committed devotees. So if we're to talk about the next 50 years or 9,500 years, we would hope that Varnashram society is established, and we can think what is our contribution toward that. As I see it, one major reason for the confusion within ISKCON today over various standards and the direction of our movement is that we have failed to demarcate society according to Varnashram, divide, distinguish, and therefore people of lower consciousness or Shudra consciousness have brought in their material desires, and we don't distinguish that from actual pure Krishna consciousness. So, and we have so many things, like some people have rock music desires, or pop psychology desires, or Ayurveda desires, and it's all mixed up with no clear distinction of what is actual Krishna consciousness. Another important instruction of Srila Prabhupada's, which is yet to be fulfilled, is the drafting of a constitution for ISKCON. No, anyway, these are a few thoughts of mine on this historical day. I'd rather look forward than look back. But in looking forward, we must look back. Singhavalokan Nyai, this is described, that the lion walks forward in the jungle, but time to time he turns his head and looks back. So especially as we come in a spiritual tradition, to go forward we must look back. Our process is sadhu marganugamanam, following the footsteps of the previous great devotees. But when I say I'd rather look forward than back, it means we don't want to just dwell in the past. Sometimes we find old people, if they can get anyone to talk with, or if they come together, they talk about all the things that happened when they were young. Their thoughts are fixed in the past. So, by the process of sadhu mahagamanam, following the tradition, we should look back, but doing so to glorify the devotees of the past, and taking their example and instruction so that we can apply them at the present and fulfill the desires of the previous acharyas now and into the future. So we are all eternally indebted to Srila Prabhupada for having founded the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And we're similarly indebted to those devotees who have helped us to come into this movement and who helped to sustain us in Krishna consciousness. So let us on this day pray to Srila Prabhupada and the previous acharyas and the faithful followers of Srila Prabhupada for their blessings, so that we can continue to serve Krishna within the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and really make it all that Srila Prabhupada wanted it to be. Srila Prabhupada ki jai! Srila Prabhupada's International Society for Krishna Consciousness ki jai!